The night had settled over Nashville like a worn-out quilt, familiar, heavy, carrying the particular smell of late autumn in Tennessee. It was a Thursday in early November, and the city hummed with its usual contradictions. The neon glow of Lower Broadway, fighting against the quiet elegance of the neighborhoods further up the hill, where old money sat behind iron gates and brick walls thick enough to muffle the sound of guitars. George Strait pulled his pickup truck into a parking spot 2 blocks from Ardmore, the restaurant that had opened 18 months ago to considerable fanfare in the local press. He wasn't the kind of man who chased new things. He'd eaten at the same diner in San Antonio for 30 years, ordered the same breakfast, tipped the same waitress. But his manager had mentioned Ardmore twice in the past month, and a friend had sent him a clipping about the chef, a young woman from Louisiana who was apparently doing something extraordinary with Gulf Coast ingredients. He sat in the truck for a moment after cutting the engine, listening to the tick of cooling metal. Through the windshield, he could see the restaurant's entrance. A dark green awning, brass fixtures, 2 potted topiaries flanking a heavy wooden door. A couple emerged as he watched. The woman laughing at something, her companion holding the door open with practiced ease. They looked the way people look when they've just had exactly the evening they expected. George was 68 years old. He had sold more country albums than almost anyone alive. He had played Madison Square Garden 17 times. He had shaken hands with 3 presidents, buried 1 close friend, watched his son grow into a man who made him proud in ways he couldn't always articulate. None of that crossed his mind as he climbed out of the truck. What crossed his mind was that he was hungry, that the temperature had dropped about 10 degrees since the afternoon, and that he hoped they had a decent bourbon list. He was wearing what he always wore when he wasn't on stage: dark jeans, brown leather boots, a simple charcoal button-down shirt, and his hat. The hat was non-negotiable. It wasn't a statement or an affectation. It was just part of how he moved through the world, the same way some men always wore a particular watch or kept a pocket knife in their right front pocket. The hat was a resistol, the same brand he'd worn for decades, and it sat on his head the way things sit when they belong there. He walked the 2 blocks at an unhurried pace. A young woman passing him on the sidewalk glanced up, did the small double-take that he'd long since stopped noticing, and kept walking. He nodded at a man walking a golden retriever. The dog pulled toward him briefly, and the man apologized. George waved it off with a small smile. At the entrance to Ardmore, he pulled open the heavy door and stepped inside. The interior was exactly what the exterior promised. Dim lighting designed by someone who understood that the right shadows could make any room feel like a secret. Dark wood paneling, leather banquettes, tables dressed in white linen, candles throwing small warm circles on the faces of the diners. Jazz played at a volume calibrated to allow conversation without effort. The bar along the left wall was serious, 2 bartenders moving with quiet efficiency. The back bar lit to show off its collection with the reverence of a small museum. There were, George noticed, at least 4 empty tables. The maitre d's stand was positioned about 10 feet inside the entrance, a sleek, dark wood lectern that held the reservation book like an altar holds a Bible. Behind it stood Douglas Whitfield. Douglas Whitfield was 44 years old and had spent the better part of 2 decades constructing an identity out of this particular job. He'd worked his way up through the hospitality industry with genuine skill and real dedication. He knew food, knew wine, understood service at a level most people never bothered to develop. But somewhere along the way, the craft had gotten tangled up with something else: the power of the door, the authority of the list, the small, intoxicating pleasure of deciding who belonged and who didn't. He looked up from the lectern as George approached. His eyes made the assessment in under 2 seconds. The jeans, The boots, the hat. No reservation confirmed in his memory. No familiar face from the circles that mattered to him. The music executives, the investors, the celebrity chefs and local politicians who'd become regulars in Ardmore's 18 months of operation. "Good evening," Whitfield said. His voice was polished and professional, carrying the particular warmth of a man who has perfected warmth as a technique, rather than an expression. "Do you have a reservation with us tonight?" "I don't," George said. His voice was what it always was. Low, unhurried, carrying the unmistakable trace of South Texas in every vowel. "I was hoping you might have something available. I can see you've got some open tables." Whitfield's expression didn't change, which was itself a kind of change. The professional warmth remained on the surface while something cooled underneath it. "I'm afraid we're fully committed this evening," he said. "Our available tables are all reserved for guests expected later in the night." George looked at him for a moment. Not aggressively. Not with the particular dangerous stillness of a man about to make trouble. Just the steady, unhurried look of someone who has seen enough of the world to know exactly what he's looking at. "Tables with reservations for what time?" he asked pleasantly. "I'm not at liberty to discuss our reservation details, sir." Whitfield maintained his professional smile. "But I'd be happy to take your information for a future reservation. We book about 3 weeks out." 3 weeks. George nodded slowly, as if considering this information with genuine interest. "All right." He didn't make a scene. That was not in his nature, and never had been. He stood there for just a beat longer than was comfortable, not challenging, just present, giving the moment its proper weight. And then he said, "I appreciate your time," and turned toward the door. What happened next took perhaps 30 seconds and changed everything. The restaurant had a small reception area near the entrance. A comfortable bench along one wall, a side table with a floral arrangement, the kind of space where people waited for tables or for companions who were running late. Seated on the bench, her coat folded over her lap, was a woman who had been watching the exchange with increasing attention. Meryl Streep was in Nashville for 3 days. She was here quietly, the way she preferred to do most things these days. No publicist, no driver, no entourage. She was meeting with a literary agent who'd flown in from New York to discuss a potential project, and they'd chosen Ardmore because the agent had eaten here twice before and loved it. They'd finished their meal 20 minutes ago, and the agent, a tall woman named Patricia Caldwell, had gone to the restroom, leaving Meryl to wait with the remains of an excellent glass of Burgundy. Meryl had grown up in New Jersey, built her career in New York, and spent enough of her adult life in various corners of American culture to have developed a genuine, if somewhat bookish, appreciation for country music. She was not a casual fan. She had listened to George Strait's music with real attention over the years, had, in fact, used one of his albums during a particularly difficult period in her late 40s to find a kind of emotional steadiness she couldn't locate anywhere else at the time. She had seen him perform once, at a benefit concert in Los Angeles, from the third row. She knew his face the way you know the face of someone who has been present in the private moments of your life without ever knowing it. She recognized him the moment he walked in. She watched Whitfield's performance with the particular focus of a woman who had spent 50 years studying human behavior professionally and personally. She understood what she was watching. She'd been the target of it herself, in different contexts, in the early years. The appraising look, the snap judgment, the door that closes before you can reach it. She'd also been on the other side long enough to know how it felt to watch it happen to someone else. When George turned and began walking back toward the entrance, Meryl stood up. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice carried. It didn't need to be loud. It was trained, precise, the voice of a woman accustomed to filling a room without effort. Several diners glanced over. The two bartenders looked up. Whitfield, in the process of returning his attention to the lectern, turned back around. George paused and looked at her. "I don't mean to intrude," Meryl said, and her tone made it clear that she was entirely comfortable intruding when the occasion warranted it. She was looking at George with a directness that held no performance in it whatsoever. Just one person addressing another. "But I'd like to ask you something, if you don't mind." George waited. "Are you really going to let this man convince you to leave?" she asked. "When I can count 4 empty tables from where I'm standing?" The restaurant had gone very quiet. The jazz continued on its programmed path, indifferent to human drama. But the human layer of sound, the conversations, the clinking glasses, the subtle percussion of silverware, had dipped noticeably. Whitfield stepped out from behind the lectern. "Ma'am, I assure you—" "I'm not speaking to you right now," Meryl said. She said it without sharpness, without raising her voice, without any of the weapons that confrontation usually deploys. She said it the way you'd say it to someone who had misunderstood a situation and simply needed a moment to reconsider. Then she looked back at George. The corner of George's mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. The expression of a man who finds a situation genuinely surprising and is allowing himself one small, private moment of appreciation before deciding how to respond. "I appreciate that," he said. "You should be sitting down," Meryl said. "So should I. My friend is still in the restroom, and I've been standing here for 2 minutes." She looked at Whitfield with the calm, devastating focus of someone who has played every kind of character and knows exactly which one to inhabit right now. "I'd like you to find this gentleman a table, whatever you have available." Whitfield opened his mouth. "And I'd like you to think carefully," she continued, "before you repeat the claim that nothing is available. Because I've been sitting here for 20 minutes, and I can see the floor plan from this bench. And I think we'd all find the next few minutes more pleasant if we didn't have to establish what I did and didn't observe." The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds. In restaurant time, it was a geological era. Whitfield looked at George, then back at Meryl, then at the dining room, where several tables of guests were watching with the poorly disguised attention of people pretending to look at their phones. "Of course," Whitfield said finally. His voice was completely professional. Not a tremor in it. Whatever was happening inside him, he had enough control to keep it entirely off his face. "Please allow me a moment to check on our availability." He turned and walked toward the back of the restaurant. George looked at Meryl. "George Strait," he said, extending his hand. "I know who you are," she said, shaking it. "Meryl Streep." "I know who you are," he said. She laughed. A genuine laugh, unguarded and warm. "Well, now that we've established that..." Patricia Caldwell emerged from the restroom at that moment, heels clicking on the hardwood, and stopped at the sight of her client standing at the entrance, shaking hands with a tall man in a cowboy hat, while the maitre d' stood 20 feet away, looking like a man processing a significant professional setback. "Did I miss something?" Patricia asked. "Douglas is finding us a table," Meryl said. Danny Kowalski was 23 years old and had been working at Ardmore for 7 months, which was long enough to understand the rhythms of the place and short enough to still be surprised by some of what he saw. He was a busser, technically, though he'd been doing the work of a junior server on busy nights because 2 of the regular staff had left in October, and Harold Vance, the owner, hadn't gotten around to replacing them yet. He'd been coming out of the kitchen with a water pitcher when he'd seen Whitfield turn away the man at the door. He'd paused near the server station, partially because the water pitcher needed a moment to settle, and partially because something about the exchange had caught his attention. There was something familiar about the man in the hat. Danny couldn't place it immediately. But there was that particular tuning fork recognition. The sense that a face belongs to a category of faces you've known your whole life without ever meeting. Then Meryl Streep had stood up, and Danny had known exactly who she was. And that had made him look back at the man in the hat with renewed attention. And something had clicked in his memory with the clean snap of a combination lock finding its numbers. George Strait. Danny was from rural Ohio. His father had played George Strait on every road trip Danny could remember. The music filling the cab of their Ford F-150 on the long, flat stretches of Interstate 70 between Columbus and whatever destination the weekend held. He'd grown up with that voice the way he'd grown up with the smell of cut grass and the particular quality of light in late August. As a fixed coordinate of the world, so embedded in his experience that he never thought to examine it separately. He stood frozen near the server station, water pitcher in hand, watching what was unfolding near the entrance. And without fully intending to, he reached into the small pocket of his uniform apron and pulled out his phone. He didn't think about it as a decision, really. It was more like the automatic reach for a camera that people of his generation had been trained into by a decade of smartphones and social media. A reflex. Something remarkable was happening. And the reflex said, "Document it." He filmed for 40 seconds. The angle wasn't perfect. He was about 30 feet away, slightly behind a column. But the sound was surprisingly clear. He caught Meryl's voice cutting through the ambient noise, caught the particular silence that fell over the restaurant when she said, "I'm not speaking to you right now," caught George's almost smile and the handshake that followed. He put his phone back in his apron pocket and went back to filling water glasses, carrying the video inside him like something he hadn't decided what to do with yet. Douglas Whitfield returned to the entrance 3 minutes after retreating to the back of the restaurant. He had spent those 3 minutes standing in the narrow hallway outside Harold Vance's office, composing himself. The office door was closed. Harold had gone home at 9, as he always did on Thursdays, leaving the floor to Whitfield's management, which was how it had been for 2 years, and which had always, until tonight, been a source of professional pride. He led George Strait to a corner table near the window, one of the better tables in the restaurant, positioned to offer a view of the street while maintaining a degree of privacy. He presented the menu with the same professional grace he brought to every interaction. Because whatever else could be said about Douglas Whitfield, he understood his craft, and his craft did not switch off just because the situation had become complicated. "Your server this evening will be Rebecca." He caught himself. "Will be Jennifer. Can I bring you something from the bar while you review the menu?" George ordered a bourbon, Blanton's, neat. He opened the menu and studied it with the methodical attention he brought to most things. Meryl and Patricia had returned to their banquet, their coats now properly stored, a second glass of wine on the table. Patricia had been given the abbreviated version of what she'd missed, and she kept glancing toward George's table with the barely suppressed energy of a woman who wanted to say something and was exercising restraint. "Don't," Meryl said. "I wasn't going to say anything." "You were absolutely going to say something." "I was going to say," Patricia said, lowering her voice, "that what you just did in the next 30 seconds is going to be on 6 different entertainment news sites. What I just did was ask a man to sit down." Meryl picked up her wine, which should not require news coverage. Patricia looked at the table where George Strait was reading the menu, his Blantons sitting untouched beside his water glass. "Do you know him? Like, personally?" "Never met him before tonight." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then, "He's just so himself. You know? There's no layer of anything." Meryl looked across the restaurant. George had set down the menu and was looking out the window at the Nashville street, his expression composed and private. "That's the rarest thing there is," she said. About 40 minutes into George's dinner, he had ordered the Gulf shrimp, which lived up to its reputation, and was working through a second bourbon. A man appeared at the restaurant's entrance who knew exactly who George Strait was. Tom Bellamy was a music journalist who had been covering the Nashville scene for 21 years. He wrote for 2 national magazines and maintained a blog that had, against all reasonable expectations, continued to attract a serious readership in the age of social media. He was at Ardmore tonight for a dinner interview with a young singer-songwriter who had canceled 20 minutes ago via text, leaving Tom with a reservation he'd waited 3 weeks for and no particular reason to be there. He spotted George immediately, and George, glancing up from his plate, spotted Tom, who he knew slightly, having done a handful of interviews with him over the years, the kind of workmanlike professional relationship that exists in the space between acquaintance and friend. Tom hesitated at the entrance, caught Whitfield's eye, and was shown to a small table for one near the bar. He did not approach George's table. He was too professional for that, and too experienced with the particular solitude that public figures sometimes need in public spaces. But he sat with the awareness of what was around him, and he ordered his dinner. And he thought about things. He had not witnessed the scene at the entrance. He'd arrived after it resolved. But the atmosphere in the restaurant had the quality of air after lightning. Slightly charged, the molecules still rearranged. He ordered his dinner and began, almost unconsciously, to compose sentences in his head. In the kitchen, Jennifer Marsh, George's server, 26, originally from Memphis, had recognized her customer about 3 minutes into taking his order. She'd handled it with the particular professionalism of someone who's been taught that the job comes before the feeling. But she'd communicated the information to Danny Kowalski in the small coded language of restaurant staff. A raised eyebrow, a tilt of the head, a 3-word exchange near the dessert station. Table 12. George Strait. Danny had nodded confirmation. They'd exchanged a look that said everything about the shared experience of being 20-something and working class and having a significant piece of American culture sitting 30 feet away, eating Gulf shrimp while the man who'd tried to turn him away stood at his lectern running through what was clearly a difficult internal calculus. Danny thought about the video on his phone throughout the rest of his shift. At 10:45, George paid his bill, left a tip that Jennifer would later describe to her roommate as genuinely generous, not performing generosity generous, and retrieved his hat from the hook beside his table. On his way out, he passed Meryl Streep's banquette. Patricia had left 20 minutes ago, an early flight the next morning. But Meryl was still there, working through the final pages of a manuscript she'd pulled from her bag once she was alone. George stopped. "Good meal?" she asked, looking up. "Exceptional, actually." He held the hat in his hands. "I wanted to thank you. You didn't have to do that." "I know I didn't have to." She closed the manuscript. "How's the bourbon here?" "Better than they deserve tonight," he said, and she laughed again. The same unguarded laugh as before. They talked for 11 minutes. Later, neither of them would have been able to reconstruct the conversation precisely, which is always the mark of a good one. They talked about Nashville, about the chef's Gulf Coast influences, about a documentary on Texas music history that they'd both happened to see. George mentioned a memory of playing a small venue in New Jersey in 1983. Meryl said she might have been in the audience, which they both acknowledged was improbable but not entirely impossible given the timing. When he finally said goodnight and walked out through the heavy door, Douglas Whitfield was behind his lectern doing the end-of-night paperwork. Their eyes met briefly. George nodded once, not warmly, not coldly, just the acknowledgement of someone who was leaving and expected nothing further. Whitfield watched him go. Outside, George walked the 2 blocks to his truck, settled in behind the wheel, and sat for a moment in the familiar dark. Then he pulled out his phone and called Alan Jackson. "You up?" he said when Alan answered. "It's nearly 11, George. Of course I'm up." "What happened?" "Something kind of strange," George said. "Kind of funny, actually." He paused. "Kind of something else, too." "Well," Alan said, "tell me." Danny Kowalski drove home at midnight. He lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in East Nashville that he shared with his college friend Brandon Webb, who was already asleep when Danny came in. Danny sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and looked at the video on his phone for a long time. It was good. That was the thing. The sound quality, the angle, the 40 seconds of perfectly composed human drama, the restaurant's quiet, Meryl's voice, the pause before Whitfield folded, and the ending, the handshake, the laugh. 2 recognizable faces sharing a moment with the natural ease of people who have nothing to prove to each other. He sat with it for 20 minutes, turning the decision over. The thing about the internet was that it was permanent. Whatever you put into it stayed in it, altered by each new context it passed through, but never entirely retrievable. He understood that in a general way, but he also understood something else, that what he'd filmed was real and true, and that the realness and truth of it might matter to people in ways he couldn't fully predict. He thought about his father, about the F-150 and Interstate 70, and the particular quality of summer afternoons in Ohio when you're 9 years old and the world is organized by the music your parents play. He posted the video at 12:17 in the morning. He went to bed. By the time he woke up at 7:15, it had been viewed 400,000 times. Harold Vance had built his restaurant on 2 principles: exceptional food and impeccable discretion. The first principle was Chef Diane Arsenault's responsibility, and she had honored it with every service for 18 months. The second principle was Douglas Whitfield's responsibility, and Harold had never had reason to question it. He was still in bed at 7:45 when his phone began a pattern of vibration that communicated without words that something had broken. The first call was from his business partner, Lewis Drummond, who had seen the video at 6:15 while eating breakfast. "Harold," Lewis said. "What?" "Check your phone, the TikTok, YouTube, it's everywhere." Harold sat up. His wife, Carol, stirred beside him. He reached for his reading glasses and his phone and spent 3 minutes watching the video, reading the comments accumulating beneath it with the speed of water finding a drain, checking the news alerts that had already begun to appear. George Strait turned away at Nashville restaurant. Meryl Streep intervenes as country legend denied entry to Ardmore. Class act. Meryl Streep stands up for George Strait in viral video. Harold Vance was 61 years old and had been in the restaurant business since he was 22. He had weathered bad reviews, difficult investors, a fire in 2009 that had destroyed a restaurant he'd built from nothing, and the particular misery of the pandemic years. He was not a man who panicked, but he sat in his bed at 7:48 in the morning, feeling something that was not quite panic and was not quite calm, occupying the unpleasant territory between them. "How many views?" he asked Lewis. "As of about 10 minutes ago? Almost 1 million. Harold closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he ran through what he needed to do in what order, with the systematic focus of a man who has learned that clear thinking is most valuable at the exact moments when it's hardest to achieve. "Get me Douglas's number," he said. "I'll call him. Then call Sheila." Sheila Park was Ardmore's PR consultant, a composed and efficient woman who Harold paid a monthly retainer to handle exactly these kinds of situations, though he'd never expected to actually need her. "Already called Sheila," Lewis said. "She's drafting something." "Good." Harold got out of bed. "Don't put anything out until I've talked to Douglas." Douglas Whitfield had been awake since 5:30. He lived alone in a two-bedroom condo in the Germantown neighborhood, a tasteful space that reflected his professional aesthetic. Everything in its place, nothing excessive. He'd seen the video at 5:37, having woken for reasons he couldn't identify, reached for his phone with the habitual reflexes of the modern sleepless, and found it waiting for him. He watched it 4 times. Then he put his phone face down on the nightstand and lay on his back staring at the ceiling for a long time. The feeling was not shame, exactly. Or it was not only shame, it was the more complicated experience of watching yourself from the outside and not entirely recognizing the person you saw. He knew, rationally, what he'd done and why he'd done it. He'd looked at a man in jeans and boots and a hat, and made a series of rapid calculations about category and worth. And those calculations had been visible to a restaurant full of witnesses, and then to a camera, and then to the world. He thought about his daughter. Caitlin Whitfield was 19 years old and a sophomore at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. She and her father had a relationship that was loving and functional and occasionally strained by the particular distance that grows between parents and children when the parents are absorbed in their professional identities. Douglas was proud of Caitlin in the steady, reliable way of a man who loves his child without always knowing how to say so. He thought of her now because Caitlin loved country music, genuinely, deeply, had grown up on it, had gone to concerts in high school, had played guitar since she was 12. His phone buzzed. Harold Vance. He answered it. Harold. Douglas. Harold's voice was controlled. Are you at home? Yes. I need you to come in at 10. We need to talk before the lunch service. Of course. Douglas paused. Harold, I need to... Not on the phone, Harold said. 10 o'clock. The call ended. Douglas set the phone down and thought about Caitlin again. She would have seen the video by now. She was always awake early, unlike most of her friends, a trait she'd gotten from him. She would have seen it, would have recognized the restaurant, would have recognized the name on the sign above the door, would have made the connection. He thought about calling her. He sat with the thought for 10 minutes, turning it over, and then he put it down and went to make coffee. And the thought followed him into the kitchen and sat across from him at the table while he stared at the morning light coming through the window. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He declined it. Then another. Then the notifications began in a different register. Social media, work email, a text from Jennifer, the server who'd been working the floor last night. Are you okay? He typed back, fine. Thank you. He did not pick up any of the unknown number calls. Tom Bellamy filed his piece at 9:15 in the morning, having been at his desk since 6. He was a professional, and professionals work with what they have. And what he had was extraordinary. He'd been present, had eaten 12 feet from the unfolding of the situation, and had the professional credibility to contextualize it in ways that the viral video alone couldn't. His piece ran 4,000 words. It was careful, specific, and deeply reported. Not a hit piece, not a celebration, but the kind of writing that earns its readership's trust by taking the complexity of a situation seriously. He wrote about the history of implicit bias in fine dining, about the particular irony of Nashville's position as both a working-class music capital and an increasingly elite culinary destination, about what it meant that the city's most famous cultural exports were often exactly the people its newest establishments failed to recognize. He wrote about George Strait with the care of someone who understood what he represented. Not just commercial success, but a specific American aesthetic that valued substance over spectacle, authenticity over performance, the enduring over the fashionable. He did not write about Whitfield with cruelty. He wrote about him with something almost sadder than cruelty, with the precision of a man who had seen this exact dynamic 100 times and understood exactly how it worked. The piece was shared 40,000 times in its first 2 hours. Caitlin Whitfield saw the video at 6:52 in the morning, sent by 3 different friends within minutes of each other. She was in her dorm room in Knoxville, sitting on the edge of her bed in yesterday's sweatshirt, coffee in hand. The kind of morning where the world comes back to you slowly, and then all at once. She watched the video. Then she read the comments beneath it, which was a mistake she recognized as a mistake even as she made it. The comments were not thoughtful. The comments were what comments always are when the internet has decided it has found something to punish. She looked at the name of the restaurant, which she knew well. Her father texted her about Ardmore regularly, proud of the place, the food, the clientele, the way the operation had earned its reputation. Then she looked at the silhouette behind the lectern in the video, the posture, the professional set of the shoulders, the way the hands moved. She put her coffee down. She called her father. The phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. She tried again. Voicemail. She sent a text. "Dad, call me when you can." Then she sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, the coffee getting cold, the room filling with morning light, her phone buzzing steadily with messages from friends who were performing. She understood this clearly and did not blame them for it. A combination of sympathy and scandalized excitement. She did not respond to any of them. What she felt was not what she'd expected to feel, which was a simpler version of upset. What she felt was more complex and harder to name. A grief-adjacent thing for an image of her father that she now had to revise. Not because she thought he was a bad person. She didn't think that. But because she'd never seen him from the outside before, not like this, not through the eyes of a restaurant full of strangers, and then 1,000,000 people on the internet. She thought about George Strait. She'd grown up on his music. Her father had played it too. This was the detail that made the whole thing strange and jagged at the edges. Douglas Whitfield was not a man who disliked country music or the people who made it. He was a man who had looked at another man in jeans and boots and made a decision before he had all the information. And the decision had been wrong. And now the information was everywhere. She got dressed and went to her morning class. She moved through the day with her phone in her pocket, calling her father twice more from the library and once from the parking lot outside the student union, getting voicemail each time. At 2 in the afternoon, he finally called back. "Caitlin," he said. His voice sounded like the ceiling of a room that was holding a lot of weight. "Dad." She was sitting on a bench outside the library, the November air cold and clear around her. "Are you okay?" A pause. "I've had better days. I saw the video." "I know. It's... Dad, it's everywhere." "I know." Another pause. "I'm going to handle it." "How?" He didn't answer that immediately, which told her he hadn't entirely worked it out yet. She'd always been able to read the pauses in her father's voice. "Have you talked to Harold?" she asked. "This morning, and I'm going back in at 4. Caitlin looked at the bare trees at the edge of the parking lot, the sky behind them the flat white of a November afternoon. "Did you know who he was when he came in?" The pause this time was different, heavier. "No," Douglas said. "Not when he walked in. But after, Jennifer figured it out about 15 minutes after I seated him." He stopped. After things were resolved. "And you didn't go over to the table." "I'm the maitre d', Caitlin. Not a fan." She recognized the professional pride in that. She also recognized it as a defense, and she suspected he recognized it too. "I'm going to handle this," he said again. "I know you will," she said. And then, because it was true, and because she needed him to know it was true, "I love you, Dad." Whatever happens with all this, she heard him breathe. I love you too, sweetheart. She held the phone for a moment after the call ended, sitting on the bench in the cold, and let the complicated feeling she'd been carrying all day settle into something she could live with. In San Antonio, at a modest ranch property that was not what people imagined when they imagined where George Strait lived, George's wife Norma had been receiving calls since 7 in the morning. She handled them with the calm efficiency she brought to everything, directing his manager to the appropriate statements, declining interview requests on George's behalf, managing the flow of incoming attention with 35 years of practice behind her. George himself spent most of the morning on the back porch with coffee and his dogs, watching the November light change on the land, occasionally checking his phone and then setting it down again. He spoke to his manager twice. He spoke to Alan twice more, continuing the conversation they'd started the night before. You know they're making you the hero of this thing, Alan said on the second call. I didn't do anything, George said. Meryl Streep is the hero, if anybody is. They're making her the hero too. The internet's got room for 2 heroes. George looked at the dogs. 2 cattle dogs moving through the yard with the purposeful energy of animals who don't know the internet exists and are better for it. That kid put it up, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Busser at the restaurant. 23. His phone. Looks like he posted it around midnight. George was quiet for a moment. How's he doing? Media's found him. He's been getting interview requests since about 8 this morning. I hope he's got good sense. He doesn't have to. He posted a video of George Strait and Meryl Streep shaking hands. He's going to be fine. George watched one of the dogs stop, look at something in the fence line, and then continue on its way. Interest satisfied and dismissed in the same motion. That poor son of a bitch, he said. And Alan knew he wasn't talking about Danny. Whitfield. He lost his whole day over jeans and a hat. Alan was quiet for a moment. Well, some lessons cost more than others. Yeah, George said. I know that. Harold Vance sat across from Douglas Whitfield at the bar of Ardmore at 4:15 in the afternoon. The restaurant closed between services, the chairs still upturned on the tables around them. The bar was lit the way it was always lit in the off hours. Work lighting, flat and functional. None of the atmospheric amber of service time. It made the space look simultaneously familiar and strange, like a stage scene without the show. Harold had a glass of water in front of him. Douglas had nothing. I've talked to Sheila, Harold said. We're going to issue a statement this evening, something straightforward, acknowledging the situation, expressing regret, not making excuses. Douglas nodded. I want to hear from you first, Harold said. Not for the statement, for me. Douglas was quiet for a moment. Harold had always respected the way he handled silence, had considered it a professional quality. Now, it read differently. I made a judgment based on appearance, Douglas said. I didn't recognize him, and He stopped. Started again. I made a decision that I shouldn't have made. Were there tables available? Yes. Harold picked up his water glass and set it down without drinking from it. Why did you tell him there weren't? Because Douglas looked at the bar surface. The mahogany was polished to a depth that showed you back to yourself, if you looked at the right angle. Because of the way he looked. Tell me what that means. Jeans, work boots, hat. Douglas said it without embellishment, which Harold appreciated and found painful in equal measure. No one with him, no reservation. I assessed him as someone who... He stopped. As someone who didn't belong here? Yes. Harold was quiet for a moment. Outside, through the front windows, Nashville's late afternoon moved past in its usual indifferent way. Douglas, Harold said, I built this place on the idea that What we were selling was an experience. Hospitality. The thing that makes people feel, he searched for the word, received. That's what the best restaurants do. They receive people. He paused. Last night, this restaurant turned away one of the most respected musicians in American history because he was wearing jeans. I know. That's going to follow us for a while. I know that too. Harold looked at him. Douglas Whitfield was a competent, dedicated professional who had served this restaurant well for 2 years. He was also a man who had, in one 30-second interaction, demonstrated a limitation that was going to cost both of them in ways that were difficult to calculate. "I'm not going to make a decision today," Harold said, "about your role here. I want to think about it, and I want you to think about it too. What you want, what's right for the restaurant, what a real response looks like, not a PR response." Douglas nodded. "I think," Harold continued, "that if you want to stay here and work, and I mean really work at this, at understanding what happened last night, there's a version of the future where that's possible. But I also think that requires more than a statement and a good service on Friday night. What does it require?" "I don't know exactly," Harold said, "but I think it starts with being honest about what happened. Not just publicly, but with yourself. And it probably involves, at some point, having a real conversation with George Strait." Douglas looked up from the bar surface. "Not for the cameras," Harold said. "Not as a PR gesture, a real conversation." He paused. "If he'll have it." Sheila Park's statement went up at 6:45 p.m., posted to Ardmore's social media accounts, and sent simultaneously to the press outlets that had been in contact throughout the day. Last night, a situation occurred at Ardmore that falls short of the standards we hold ourselves to. A guest was incorrectly turned away in a manner that was inhospitable and wrong. We offer our sincere apologies to Mr. Strait and to every guest who was present. We are addressing this internally with the seriousness it deserves. Ardmore's commitment is to welcome every person who walks through our door with equal dignity and respect. We failed that commitment last night, and we take full responsibility for that failure. It was, Sheila had told Harold, as good as a statement could be. Specific, accountable, without defensive caveats. The Internet's response to it was mixed, which was the best a statement of that kind could reasonably expect. Some people found it sufficient. Many people found it insufficient. A faction of people found it too corporate. Another faction copied the text into a document and analyzed it word by word for what it revealed about the restaurant's legal strategy, which said more about the Internet than it did about the statement. Tom Bellamy read it and wrote a brief follow-up noting that the statement took responsibility without identifying the specific failure or the person responsible, which was true and which he suspected was intentional, and which he considered fair to note. Danny Kowalski read it sitting in his apartment in East Nashville. Brandon was on the couch next to him, watching the notification count on Danny's phone climb in real time. "Dude," Brandon said, for approximately the 40th time that day. "I know," Danny said. He'd done one interview, a phone call with a Nashville-based entertainment reporter at noon, which he'd handled with surprising composure for a 23-year-old who had not expected to wake up to 500,000 views and a ringing phone. He'd told the truth. He'd recognized the situation, reached for his phone on instinct, and posted the video because he thought it mattered. He had not made himself the protagonist of the story, which several journalists had tried to encourage him to do. He'd kept the focus where he thought it belonged, on what had happened at the door, on what Meryl Streep had done, on George Strait's dignity throughout. A reporter had asked him if he felt guilty posting it, capturing someone's embarrassing moment and sharing it with the world. Danny had thought about that. "I was thinking more about Mr. Strait's embarrassing moment," he'd said. He was the one who'd been told to leave. The quote had been used in 8 different articles by the end of the day. Caitlin Whitfield drove from Knoxville to Nashville on Friday morning. She hadn't told her father she was coming, not because she wanted to surprise him, but because she wasn't sure, until she was already on the highway, that she was actually going. She arrived at his condo at 11. He opened the door and looked at her for a moment before stepping aside to let her in. And in that moment, she saw what the last 36 hours had done to him, in the small, specific ways that other people might not notice, but that she, who had known his face her entire life, could read clearly. He looked tired in a way that wasn't about sleep. She'd brought coffee from his favorite place, 2 blocks from his building. She set the cups on the kitchen table and sat down across from him, and they looked at each other across the table, the way people look when they're about to say something true. "I've been thinking about what to say to you since yesterday morning," she said. "Caitlin, you don't—" "Let me finish." She wasn't angry. Her voice was steady and even, the same quality he recognized as his own. "I've been thinking about what happened, and I've been thinking about why it hurts in the specific way it hurts. And I think I understand it now." He waited. "It's not that you're a bad person," she said. "I've never thought that, and I don't think it now. What hurts is that you did something without thinking about it. And that tells me there's a thought in there somewhere that you haven't examined yet. A thought about who belongs where. And the reason that hurts is that—" She paused, picked up her coffee cup, and set it down again. "The reason it hurts is that I don't want that thought to be in my father, and finding out it might be is hard." Douglas was quiet for a long moment. The kitchen was very still. "I think it was in me," he said finally. "The thought you're describing. I think it was in me, and I didn't examine it because I thought I was making a professional judgment." He looked at his coffee. "I was making a professional judgment. That's the worst part, in a way." It didn't feel like prejudice. It felt like expertise. Caitlin looked at him. "I've been sitting with that since Wednesday night," he said. "The way something can feel like good judgment and be something else entirely." "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Harold wants me to reach out to George Strait, if he'll have it." "Not a PR thing?" "Not a PR thing." She looked at him for a long time. "I think you should. I think you should do it because it's the right thing to do, not because it'll help the restaurant." "I know the difference," he said. "I know you do," she said. "That's why I drove 3 hours this morning." He looked at his daughter across the kitchen table. This 19-year-old who had driven 3 hours on a Friday morning to sit with him in his embarrassment and tell him a hard truth, and then tell him she believed he knew the difference. He felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight since 5:30 Wednesday morning. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," she said. "Buy me breakfast." He laughed. It was the first time since Wednesday. George Strait received a handwritten letter on Monday morning. His manager brought it in with the morning mail, a cream-colored envelope, a Nashville postmark, addressed in careful, distinctive handwriting. No return address. George opened it at the kitchen table, Norma across from him with her own coffee and her own correspondence. "Mr. Strait, I am the person who turned you away from Ardmore on Thursday evening. I'm writing by hand because I want this to be a real thing and not a managed thing. And I've learned in the past few days that those 2 categories can be confused pretty easily. What I did was wrong. I made an assumption about who you were and what you were worth as a customer based on the way you were dressed. And that assumption was wrong in every way that matters. Not just because of who you turned out to be, but because it would have been wrong regardless of who you were. The version of me that stood behind that lectern on Thursday night made a judgment that I've spent my career believing I wasn't the kind of person to make. Finding out I am, or that I can be, is something I'm going to be working with for a while. I don't expect a response. I'm not writing to manage anything or fix anything publicly. I'm writing because you deserve a direct acknowledgement from the person responsible. And because I owe it to myself to say this clearly. I was wrong. I know I was wrong, and I'm sorry. Douglas Whitfield. George read it twice. Then he set it on the table. Norma looked up. Good? Handwritten, he said. She extended her hand, and he passed it across the table. She read it. Her expression moved through a few things. He sounds like a man who's had a hard week, she said. Yeah, George said. He has. What are you going to do? George was quiet for a moment, looking out the kitchen window at the Texas morning. I think I'm going to call Alan, he said. Norma gave him the look she'd been giving him for 35 years. The one that said she knew what he was actually thinking and was waiting for him to catch up to it. Or, he said, I might call the restaurant. Harold Vance was in his office at Ardmore at 11:15 on Tuesday morning when his assistant knocked. There's a call for you on line 1, she said. He said to tell you it's George Strait. Harold looked up from his desk. He'd been going through the reservation requests that had flooded in over the weekend. A silver lining he found morally uncomfortable and professionally unavoidable. Ardmore had more reservation requests in the 72 hours since the video than in the previous 3 months combined. He picked up the phone. Mr. Vance, George said. Mr. Strait. Harold's voice was careful. I owe you. I read the statement, George said. I appreciated it. He paused. I also received a letter from your maitre d'. I didn't know he'd written, Harold said. That's probably why it worked, George said. I'm calling because I'd like to take you up on that table, if you're still open for it. Harold was quiet for a moment. Of course. When would... Thursday, George said. Feels right. Thursday. Harold looked at his desk calendar, which he didn't need to look at, because he would have cleared every Thursday for the rest of the year for this. Absolutely. 7 o'clock? 7's fine. A pause. I'll be bringing a friend. Of course. And I'd appreciate it if Mr. Whitfield was working. Harold was quiet for a moment. I'll make sure of it. I'm not coming to make a scene, George said. And the simplicity of it, the absence of threat or performance in the words, was its own kind of authority. I'm coming for dinner. The shrimp was really good. Harold laughed. He hadn't expected to, and it surprised him. Chef Arsenault will be glad to hear it. Tell her. After the call ended, Harold sat at his desk for a moment. Then he got up and walked out to the dining room, where Douglas Whitfield was reviewing the reservation book for the week. Douglas, Whitfield looked up. George Strait is coming in Thursday at 7. Harold watched him take it in. He specifically asked that you be working. A long pause. Okay, Douglas said. Are you all right? Douglas looked at the reservation book. Then, at the empty dining room, the tables set for the lunch service. The morning light coming through the windows at the particular angle it only reached in November. I think so, he said. Yeah. Alan Jackson arrived at George's ranch in San Antonio on Wednesday afternoon, driving himself in a truck that was, Norma noted privately, slightly more battered than you'd expect. They sat on the back porch for an hour before George said anything about Thursday. Alan, who had known George Strait for 30 years and understood the value of allowing things their natural arrival time, talked about music and weather and a horse he was thinking about buying, and waited. You sure you want to come to this dinner? George said eventually. You called me, Alan said. I know I called you. Then I'm coming. Alan leaned back in his chair. What do you want out of it? George thought about it honestly. I want a good meal, he said. I want the chef to know somebody appreciated her food enough to come back after... He paused. After what happened? And Whitfield? I want him to understand that I don't carry it, George said. Not because what he did was fine, because I've been turned away from places before, and the places are always worse for it, and I don't end up any different. He looked at the land. Carrying it would change me and not change him. That's a bad trade. Alan was quiet for a moment. When did you get so wise? I've always been this wise, George said. You just weren't paying attention. Alan laughed. It carried across the yard, and the two cattle dogs, which had been lying in the shade near the fence, both lifted their heads briefly before settling back down. Thursday evening. Nashville had gone cold and clear, the kind of November night that reminded you the city was further north than it sometimes felt. The sky overhead, a deep and particular blue that came only in the last weeks of autumn before the gray settled in for winter. George and Alan arrived at Ardmore at 7:03. Douglas Whitfield was behind the lectern. George pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. Alan followed, and for a moment the three of them occupied the same space near the entrance. The maître d' and the two men from Texas, in the room that had, 6 days ago, been the site of something that became, for a short time, the story the country needed to tell itself about class and recognition and the gap between what we think we see and what we're actually looking at. Douglas came out from behind the lectern. "Mr. Strait," he said. His voice was steady. "Mr. Jackson." He looked at George with the direct, uncomplicated gaze of a man who has said what he needed to say and is not pretending otherwise. "I'm glad you came back." George looked at him. In the look was not forgiveness exactly. That word implied too much transaction, too much exchange. It was something simpler and more durable. The acknowledgement of one person to another that the account is clear, that they can proceed from here. "Good to be here," George said. Douglas led them to a table near the window. The same table, as it happened, where George had sat the previous Thursday. He presented the menus with the same professional grace he brought to every table. He did not make the interaction more than it was. He did not make it less. When he turned back toward the lectern, George said, "The letter was well written." Douglas paused. "Thank you," he said. "It wasn't easy. Best things usually aren't." He nodded and walked back to his station. Jennifer appeared to take their drink orders, and she greeted George with the straightforward warmth of someone who has been in the presence of celebrity long enough to know that what most people want from you is just to be treated normally. "Blanton's?" she asked. "You remembered," George said. "It's a good order," she said, and went to get it. Alan leaned across the table. "She's good. The whole staff is good," George said. "The place is good." That's the thing that got lost in all of it. A little. The place itself is really good. Alan looked around the room. It was a full service. Every table occupied, the bar 3 deep, the ambient noise at exactly the pitch of a restaurant that's running well. He noticed, near the bar, a young man in a busser's uniform who looked up from a table he was clearing and went very still for a moment upon seeing them. "That the kid with the phone?" Alan asked. George hadn't looked over. "Probably." "You want to—" "Later," George said. "Let him work." Alan nodded. He picked up the menu and studied it. "What's good?" "The shrimp," George said. "Whatever the Louisiana chef does with the shrimp." Midway through the dinner, a woman stopped at their table on her way back from the restroom. She was 60, with the particular kind of face that becomes more interesting with age rather than less. And she stopped not because she was performing recognition, but because the recognition was genuine, and the situation seemed to permit it. "I just want to say," she said to George, "that I've been listening to your music since 1982. And what happened here last week—" She stopped. "Well, I'm glad you came back." "Thank you," George said. "My husband proposed to me at one of your concerts," she said. 1986, Houston. That's a good city for a proposal." She smiled, and went back to her table, where her husband was watching. He raised his glass slightly when she sat down. Alan watched this. "Does that happen everywhere you go?" "Not as much as you'd think," George said. "People are mostly just living their lives." "Most people," Alan said, "don't have someone propose to their wife at your concert." "That's fair," George said. At the end of the meal, Danny Kowalski approached their table. He'd spent the entire service building up to it, and then losing his nerve and then building up to it again. And finally, as the restaurant moved into its late evening rhythm and the moment felt more accessible, he came over. "Mr. Strait," he said, "I'm Danny Kowalski. I'm the one who—" "I know," George said. "Sit down for a second." Danny sat, formally and quickly, like a man afraid the chair might be taken away. "I wanted to apologize," Danny said, "for posting the video without—" "You don't need to apologize," George said. "You did what you thought was right. How's the fallout been for you?" Danny blinked. "The fallout for me? Professionally. Personally. Danny processed the fact that George Strait was asking about the fallout for him. "I mean, I've had some interview requests, and Harold said my job is secure," Danny finished. He looked at the table for a moment, then back up. "I wasn't sure it would be. When I posted it, I wasn't really thinking about—" "You weren't thinking about consequences," George said. "You were thinking about what was right in front of you." "Yes, sir." "How old are you?" 23. George nodded. "At 23, that's mostly the correct instinct. The calibration comes later." He paused. "You kept the focus on the right thing in the interviews I heard about. You didn't make it about yourself." Danny looked like he wasn't sure how to receive this. "I just said what happened. That's all anybody ever needs to do," George said. "Most people can't manage it." Alan, who had been quietly finishing the last of his bourbon, set the glass down. "You from Nashville originally?" "Ohio," Danny said. "Columbus. Long way from home." "Yes, sir, but Nashville feels—" He stopped. "It feels right. You know? Like the city makes sense to me." Alan smiled. "Yeah, it does that to people." George reached into his jacket pocket and produced a card. Plain white, just a phone number and a name. He set it on the table in front of Danny. "That's my manager's number," he said. "If you ever need a reference, or if the road takes a turn and you need a connection, you can use my name." Danny looked at the card. He picked it up with the careful attention of someone handling something that might not be real. "Mr. Strait," he said. "You did good," George said simply. And the simplicity of it closed the conversation in the way only truly simple things can. Danny stood. He shook George's hand, and then Alan's, and he went back to work, and he carried the card in his shirt pocket for the rest of the shift, and then transferred it to his wallet, where it would remain for years, not as a trophy, but as a kind of compass point. Just before 11, as George and Alan were settling the bill, a process that involved a brief, good-natured negotiation with Harold Vance, who had appeared from the back of the restaurant and was determined to comp the evening, and George, who was equally determined to pay, Meryl Streep walked in. She was alone. She had a reservation. She stopped when she saw George, and the expression on her face was the unguarded one. The genuine version, not the version people wore when they knew they were being watched. "You came back," she said. "You were right," he said. "The food is too good to hold a grudge against." She laughed, looked at Alan, who stood slightly behind George with the particular stance of a man who has spent a lifetime being famous and knows how to be present without taking up more space than the moment requires. "Meryl Streep," she said. "Alan Jackson," he said. "I know who you are." "I know who you are," she said. "George played me 3 of your songs on his phone last week." Alan looked at George. "I had a long drive," George said, without apology. Meryl was shown to her table by Douglas Whitfield, who greeted her with the same professional grace he'd brought to every table that night. She sat, received her menu, ordered a glass of the same burgundy she'd been drinking the previous Thursday. She looked across the room once at George and Alan, who were completing the argument with Harold about the bill. Harold won, eventually, and George allowed it. And they shook hands at the door with the particular warmth of men who have arrived at something real through the difficult route. Douglas Whitfield was at the lectern as they left. George paused. "Thank you for the letter," he said again. Douglas met his eyes. "Thank you for coming back. Take care of this place," George said. "It's worth taking care of." Douglas nodded. Something in his face moved, not breaking exactly, but yielding, the way wood yields to something patient and persistent. George put on his hat and walked out through the heavy door. Alan followed. The November air received them, cold and clear, Nashville glittering beyond the dark green awning. They walked to Alan's truck. "You want to get a proper drink somewhere?" Alan asked. "I think so," George said. "Somewhere with no cameras." Alan unlocked the truck. "I know a place." "You always know a place." "One of my many gifts." They drove south on the main road, the city lights falling away as they moved, the night settling around the truck, the way nights do when you have nowhere in particular to be, and the right company for the journey. In the weeks that followed, several things happened, and several things didn't. Tom Bellamy wrote a longer piece, published in a national magazine, about the sociology of exclusion in American fine dining. It was widely read and cited in 3 academic papers the following year. He named George Strait once, briefly, and spent the rest of the piece on the broader pattern, which was the correct editorial decision, and which George, when someone mentioned it to him, noted approvingly. Danny Kowalski was offered 3 different jobs in media and communications on the strength of his interview composure and the implicit story of the video. He declined all of them and stayed at Ardmore, where Harold promoted him to junior server in December. He called his father in Ohio the night of the promotion, and they talked for 40 minutes, longer than they'd talked in years. And his father told him he'd done the right thing posting the video, and Danny said he thought so too. And they both knew they were really talking about something larger than the video. Caitlin Whitfield came home for Thanksgiving 3 weeks later and sat across from her father at his kitchen table and found him different in a way she couldn't immediately articulate. Not diminished, not excessively contrite, changed in the specific way that people change when they've seen something true about themselves and chosen to stay with the seeing rather than look away. He'd started volunteering on Saturday mornings at a community kitchen in North Nashville. Not for optics, not because anyone knew, but because Harold had suggested it, and because he'd found, to his own surprise, that it mattered to him. That cooking and serving and the work of receiving people without categories made him understand something about his job that he'd managed, over 2 decades, to partially forget. He and Caitlin drove there together that Saturday morning. She stood beside him at a stainless steel counter and helped serve food to 60 people who were glad to have it. And nobody in the room knew or cared who she was or what her father did for a living. On the drive back, she said, "This was good." "Yes," he said. "It was." "Are you going to keep doing it?" "Yes," he said, without hesitation. She looked out the window at Nashville going past, the neighborhoods changing in character from block to block, the city carrying all of its contradictions in plain sight, the way all real cities do. "Good," she said. Meryl Streep mentioned the evening once in an interview the following spring in response to a question about something else entirely. The interviewer had asked her about moments when she'd been moved by unexpected human behavior, and she'd thought for a moment and said, "I saw a man handle an indignity with complete grace recently. He was in a situation that would have made most people angry, and he was just... She paused. He was just himself. Fully himself. No armor, no performance. Just exactly who he was, in jeans and a hat, in a restaurant that didn't want him, and he walked out of there with more dignity than the place will have for years. The interviewer had asked who she was talking about. "Someone who doesn't need me to tell his story," she said. And then she moved on to the next question. And the moment passed, and the magazine ran the quote without the name, and anyone who knew, knew, and anyone who didn't simply had a beautiful sentence about grace and dignity to carry around for a while, which seemed like enough. In San Antonio, on a Tuesday in late November, George Strait sat on the back porch in the particular stillness of a morning that had not yet decided what to become. The light was thin and gold, the way it gets in Texas when the season finally admits to itself that summer is truly gone. The cattle dogs moved through the yard with their purposeful, satisfied energy. Norma came out with 2 cups of coffee and sat in the chair beside him. "You're quiet," she said. "Thinking," he said. "About Nashville?" "About that kid," he said. "Danny, from Ohio. The one with the phone. 23 years old," George said. "Drives from Ohio to Nashville because the city makes sense to him. Works a restaurant job. Posts a video because he thinks it's right. Not because he knows what it'll do." He looked at the yard. "That's a certain kind of courage. The kind you don't know you have until you use it." Norma looked at him. "Are you going to call him?" George sipped his coffee. "Might call Harold. See how the kid's doing. Harold will tell you he's doing fine." "I know. But you'll call anyway." "Probably," George said. Norma looked out at the yard, at the dogs, at the Texas morning going about its ancient business. "You're a good man, George Strait," she said. He looked at her, the woman he'd loved for 35 years, who knew him better than anyone alive, who had said that same thing to him perhaps 100 times in 100 different moments, and always meant exactly the same thing by it. "I'm trying," he said. "That's the whole job," she said. "For all of us." The morning opened around them, and the dogs moved through the yard, and the coffee was good, and Nashville was 500 miles away. And somewhere in the city, a restaurant was getting ready to open its doors.